threat of tariffs, which was irresponsible at best when he made it. I think we should give credit to NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte for finding at least a basis on which he could give Trump the pretext to climb down. Whether we can move to a deal, I think is impossible to say. I researched this question in 2019 when the issue of Greenland came up in Trump's first term, we saw then that there was a clear framework, the 1951 Defense of Greenland Treaty between the United States and Denmark. If we had been able to get to negotiations back in 2019, I think this problem could have been solved. There's no need for any of the turmoil that we've seen over the past several weeks. This was exactly the framework we need to enhance our security in the high north for the United States, but really for all NATO members.
Mr. Bolton, one more question, if I may. This, of course, marks this week a year since Donald Trump returned to office. It's very clear you set out in this interview things that you don't like that he's done. What do you think is the best thing he's done since he's returned to office?
Well, I think for a change following normal conservative Republican principles, he's reduced taxes, is dramatically slashing economic regulation, and I think the growth rate of the GNP shows how important those policies are. If he just revoke all of his tariffs, I think we'd be in even better shape. But certainly what's happened to the economy compared to other countries around the world, it's been very positive.
Okay, John Bolton, thank you very much for taking the time to join us here on BBC News. Hope to have you back again soon.
Thank you.
Now, let's bring you more on the reaction from the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, to those comments we were discussing there with John Bolton from President Trump about NATO troops in Afghanistan.
Let me start by paying tribute to 457 of our armed services who lost their lives in Afghanistan. I will never forget their courage, their bravery, and the sacrifice that they made for their country. There are many also who are injured, some with life-changing injuries. And so I consider President Trump's remarks to be insulting and frankly appalling. And I'm not surprised they cause such hurt to the loved ones of those who were killed or injured, and in fact, across the country.
As well as politicians expressing a view, a lot of the relatives, some bereaved, others whose sons in particular suffered dreadful injuries. One is Diane Durney, mother of a man called Ben Parkinson, dreadful injuries. She has said that you need to be tougher with President Trump and demand an apology from him. Will you call for an apology from the President?
Well, I've made my position clear, and what I say to Diane is if I had misspoken in that way or said those words, I would certainly apologise, and I'd apologise to her.
This is becoming a bit of a habit now. You're having to distance yourself and criticise the President about third or fourth time in this week. Are you getting a bit exasperated by some of the things President Trump says?
We have a very close relationship with the US, and that is important for our security, for our defence and our intelligence, and it's very important we maintain that relationship. But it is because of that relationship that we fought alongside the Americans for our values in Afghanistan. And it was in that context that people lost their lives or suffered terrible injuries, fighting for freedom, fighting with our allies for what we believe in.
Keir Starmer there. Well, let's get reaction from the US. Let's join our State Department correspondent, Tom Bateman. Tom, it's probably too early to get any reaction from the US and the White House on what we've heard from Sir Keir Starmer, but stepping back a bit, it's strong words from the British Prime Minister, isn't it, about a close ally?
Yeah, it is. And, in terms of what Keir Starmer has said there in the comments you've just seen, we have put those to the White House in the last 90 minutes or so, nothing back on that. But they did respond earlier to him having said that President Trump was wrong and basically to the outpouring of outrage across the political spectrum that we've heard today, and responded from the Deputy Press Secretary, Anna Kelly, at the White House, saying that President Trump is right, was their words, but then went on to talk about NATO contributions and his negotiations having sort of pushed NATO countries to up their contributions and so on. So it was really an answer to a different question, although I think that the fact that even that sort of first response seemed to double down on what President Trump has said, I don't think it's going to particularly help in terms of the relationship with the UK, and therefore, you know, we've seen Keir Starmer come out with even tougher language. But, you know, it is strong words, and I think what that speaks to is just the sort of nightmare of disorientation that the Trump administration has created for its own allies, particularly in the last week to 10 days, as he is increasingly criticised NATO allies. We've seen this attempt to, start or threaten to annex Greenland to the United States, a crisis among NATO allies in Davos, and then Mr. Trump could sort of walk back a whole load of that, but his rhetoric remains. And, you know, I think that the deeper point about this administration is it has been saying repeatedly to Europe that it believes that Europe has been in part responsible for a sort of liberal world order which has malfunctioned, which has left large parts of their populations behind, both in Europe and America, ties all this in with the sort of free movement of goods and people, that immigration has left Europe unrecognisable, and it sees the Europeans as part of that. We're seeing this sort of stream of insults from President Trump, of which this is the latest, frankly. But I think, you know, it's one thing to say to the Europeans, NATO hasn't pulled its weight. We've had to do everything as the US, which of course isn't actually true either. But they, you know, you can argue that's a negotiating tactic. But to push on an issue like the deaths of NATO soldiers, that clearly crosses the line. I think why you're seeing this strength of response from Keir Starmer, but that then risks a further retaliation now from the White House as well.
Yeah, let's see what happens next. Tom Bateman, our State Department correspondent for the moment. Thank you very much. Around the world and across the UK, this is The World Today on BBC News.
Anybody who is struggling with alcohol should try Core Health. Within a week, the cravings were completely gone. Core Health is safe, science-backed, and it works. I couldn't believe how easy it was. Alcohol doesn't run my life anymore.
Text TV to 710 710 to learn more.
When you're at the starting line for your next event, 4imprint has the right promotional gear. Bottles, bags, hats, and tees delivered on time to energize your customers and your team. Race now to 4imprint.com.
4imprint, for certain.
Origin Investments was built by investors for investors and has helped thousands build wealth through real estate. Our flagship Income Plus fund has outperformed its peer set average over the last 1, 3, and 5 years, with positive returns 95% of months since inception. And for those seeking passive income, the fund currently has an after-tax yield of more than 6%, so you keep more of what you earn. Visit IncomePlusFund.com to learn how Origin can enhance your wealth.
The first three-way talks between Russia, the US and Ukraine since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion nearly 4 years ago have been taking place in Abu Dhabi. Senior officials from all three nations are involved, but it's unclear whether they'll be in the same room together at any point. And with many issues unresolved, like territory, it's also unclear whether this marks a big step towards peace. Well, these talks come after President Putin and President Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff held talks in Moscow on Thursday, which the Kremlin described as useful but very frank. Also on Thursday, President Zelensky and Trump met in Davos. Mr. Trump said the deal was reasonably close. Well, as we were saying, territory remains a key sticking point, with President Zelensky confirming that will be on the agenda in these latest talks. Meanwhile, Moscow says Kyiv must pull out of the Donbass region in the east of Ukraine for any deal to end the war. Let's have a listen to the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov.
Of course, we do not want to publicly go into the details of the provisions being discussed, and therefore I cannot tell you what formula is